Chapter 1 of Book 1 of Topics. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jeffrey Edwards. Topics by Aristotle. Translated by Octavius Owen. Chapter 1 of the argument of this treatise, of syllogism and its kinds. The purpose of this treatise is to discover a method by which we shall be able to syllogize about every proposed problem from probabilities, and when we ourselves sustain the argument, we may assert nothing repugnant. First then, we must declare what a syllogism is, and what are its differences, in order that the dialectic syllogism may be apprehended, for we investigate this in the proposed treatise. A syllogism then is a discourse in which certain things being laid down, something different from the posita happens from necessity through the things laid down. Demonstration indeed is when a syllogism consists of things true and primary, or of such a kind as assume the principle of the knowledge concerning them through certain things primary and true. But the dialectic syllogism is that which is collected from probabilities. Things true and primary indeed are those which obtain belief, not through others, but through themselves, as there is no necessity to investigate the why in scientific principles, but each principle itself ought to be credible by itself. Probabilities, however, are those which appear to all, or to most men, or to the wise, and to these either to all, or to the greater number, or to such as are especially renowned and illustrious. Moreover, a contentious syllogism is one which is constructed from apparent, but not real probabilities, and which appears to consist of probabilities, or of apparent probabilities. For not everything which appears probable is so, since none of those which are called probable has entirely the superficial image of probability, as happens to be the case about the principles of contentious arguments, since immediately, and for the most part, the nature of the false in them is evident even to those who have small perception. Let then the first of the syllogisms called contentious be also called a syllogism, but let the other be a contentious syllogism, yet not a syllogism simply, since it appears indeed to draw an inference, but does not collect one. Besides all the above named syllogisms, there are paralogisms, which consist of things peculiar to certain sciences, as happens to be the case in geometry, and those sciences allied to it, for this mode seems to differ from the syllogisms enumerated, since he who describes falsely neither syllogizes from the true and primary, nor from the probable, for he does not fall into definition, since he neither assumes things which appear to all men, nor those which appear to the greater number, nor to the wise, and to these neither to all, nor to the greater part, nor to the most famous, but he makes a syllogism from assumptions, appropriate indeed to science, yet not from the true, as either by describing semicircles not as they ought to be, or by drawing certain lines not as they ought to be drawn, he produces a paralogism. Let then the species of syllogisms, to comprehend them summarily, be those which I have stated, and in a word, to sum up all that have been spoken of, and those which shall be mentioned hereafter, let our definition be so far given, because we do not propose to deliver an accurate description of any of these, but wish merely to run through them briefly, thinking it quite sufficient according to the proposed method, in some way or other, to be able to know each of them. Chapter 2. That this treatise is useful for three purposes. It will be consequent upon what we have stated to describe to what an extent and for what subjects this treatise is useful. It is so for three: exercise, conversation, philosophical science. That it is useful for exercise appears evident from these, that possessing method we shall be able more easily to argue upon every proposed subject. But for conversation it is useful, because having enumerated the opinions of the many, we shall converse with them, not from foreign, but from appropriate dogmas, confuting whatever they appear to us to have erroneously stated. Again, it is useful for philosophical science, because being able to dispute on both sides, we shall more easily perceive in each the true and the false. Also it is applicable to the first principles of each science, since we cannot say anything about these from the appropriate principles of a proposed science, as they are the first principles of all. But we must necessarily discuss these through probabilities in the singulars. This however is peculiar, or especially appropriate to dialectic, for, being investigative, it possesses the way to the principles of all methods. Chapter 3. In what consists dialectical skill. We shall possess this method perfectly when we are similarly disposed, as in rhetoric, medicine, and such like powers, and this is to effect what we choose from possibilities, since neither will the rhetorician persuade from every mode, nor the physician heal. But if a man omits no possibility, we say that he sufficiently possesses science. Chapter 4. Of Problem and Proposition. First then, let us examine of what this method consists. If therefore we assume for how many, what kind of, and from what things, arguments are constructed, and how we may be well provided with these, we shall sufficiently gain our point. Now those things are equal and the same in number from which arguments are constructed, and about which syllogisms are conversant. For arguments are constructed of propositions, but the things with which syllogisms are conversant are problems. Now every proposition and every problem shows either genus, property, or accident. For difference, being generic, we must place together with genus. Since however of property, one kind signifies the very nature of a thing, but the other does not signify it, let property be divided into the two above named parts, and let what signifies the very nature of a thing be called definition, but let the other, according to the common appellation attributed about these, be called property. Now it is clear from what we have said, that according to the present division, it happens that all are four, either property, or definition, or genus, or accident. Let however no one suppose that we say that each of these asserted by itself is a proposition or a problem, but that problems and propositions are produced from these. Still a problem and a proposition differ in mode, since when it is thus said, is a pedestrian biped animal the definition of man, and is animal the genus of man, there is a proposition, but if it should be said whether is a pedestrian biped animal the definition of man or not, there is a problem. So also in other things. Wherefore, with propriety, problems and propositions are equal in number, for from every proposition you will make a problem by changing the mode. Chapter 5. Of Definition, Genus, Property, and Accident. We must describe what definition, property, genus, and accident are. Now, definition is a sentence signifying what a thing is, and either a sentence is employed instead of a noun, or a sentence instead of a sentence, since it is possible to define some things which are signified by a sentence. As many, however, as in some way or other make the explanation by a noun, evidently do not explain the definition of the thing, since every definition is a certain sentence. Still we must refer a thing of this kind to definition, as that the becoming is beautiful. In like manner also, whether sense and science are the same or different, since about these definitions, whether they are the same or different, there is a very great discussion. In short, however, all things may be called definitive, which are under the same method, with definitions, but that all which have been spoken of are of this kind is evident from these considerations. For when we are able to argue that a thing is the same, and that it is different, we shall by the same manner be well supplied with arguments about definitions, since when we have shown that it is not the same, we shall have upset the definition. Still, what is now said is not converted, since it is not enough to construct a definition to show that it is the same, but for the subversion of definition it is sufficient to show that it is not the same thing. Property, indeed, is that which does not show what a thing is, but is present to it alone, and reciprocates with the thing, as it is the property of a man to be capable of grammar, for if he is a man he is capable of grammar, and if he is capable of grammar he is a man. Since no one calls property that which may possibly be present with something else, as sleep to a man, not even if it should happen at a certain time to be present with him alone. If then anything of this kind should be called property, it will not be called property simply, but at a certain time, or with reference to something, since to be on the right hand is sometimes a property, but biped happens to be called property with reference to something, as to man with reference to horse and dog. But that nothing which may possibly be present with something else is reciprocally predicated is clear, since it is not necessary, if anything sleeps, that it should be a man. Genus, however, is that which is predicated of many things differing in species, in answer to what a thing is. But let those things be said to be predicated in answer to what a thing is, which are fitted to answer the person inquiring what the proposed thing is, as it is adapted to man, when it is asked what the proposed thing is, to say that he is animal. Moreover, it is generic, whether one thing is in the same genus with another, or in a different genus, since such a thing falls under the same method with genus, as having discussed that animal is the genus of man, and in like manner of ox. We shall reason that they are in the same genus. If, however, we should show that it is the genus of one of them, but not of the other, we shall reason that these are not in the same genus. Accident, again, is that which is not any of these, neither definition, nor property, nor genus, yet it is present with a thing, and is that which may possibly be present with some one and the same thing, and may not be present, as to sit may be and may not be present with some one and the same thing, and in like manner whiteness, for there is nothing to prevent the same thing being at one time white and at another not white. Now of these definitions of accident the second is the better, since when the first is stated it is necessary in order to understand it to know previously what definition genus and property are, but the second is self-sufficient for the knowledge per se of what the thing asserted is. To accident also let comparisons of things with each other belong, in whatever way they are derived from accident, as whether the honourable or the advantageous be preferable, and whether a life of virtue or of enjoyment is the sweeter. And if there happens to be any other assertion similar to these, for in all things of this kind the question arises as to which the predicate rather happens to belong. Still from these it is manifest that there is nothing to prevent accident sometimes, and with reference to something, becoming property, as to sit being accident, when some one alone sits, will then be a property, but one not sitting alone, it will be a property with reference to those who do not sit, so that nothing prevents accident from becoming property in a certain relation and at a certain time. Simply, however, it will not be property. Chapter 6 of Arguments against Genus, etc., as applicable to the subversion of definition. Nevertheless, we must not forget that everything which is referred to property, genus, and accident will also be adapted to definitions. For by showing that a thing is not present with that alone which is under definition, as in the case of property, or that what is given in the definition is not genus, or that some one of those things stated in the definition is not present, which may also be said in accident, we shall have subverted the definition, so that on account of the reason given before, all those things which have been enumerated will after a certain manner be definitive. Nevertheless, we must not on this account look for one method universal in all things, as neither is it easy to discover this, and if it were discovered it would be altogether obscure and useless to the proposed treatise. But a peculiar method being delivered as to each of the defined genera singly, the discussion of the proposition will be easy from those things which are appropriate to each. Wherefore, as we have before said, we must make a rough division, but of the rest we must join those which are especially appropriate to each, denominating them both definitive and generic. What, however, have been set forth have almost been adapted to each. Chapter 7. In how many ways "same" is predicated. We must first of all distinguish about "the same" in how many ways it is predicated, but "the same" to speak in general terms, may appear to be divided triply, since we are accustomed to denominate a thing the same in number, or in species, or in genus. In number indeed, when the names are many, but the thing one, as a garment and a vestment, but in species, when the things being many are without specific difference, as man with man, and horse with horse, for such things are said to be the same in species, as are under the same species. In like manner also, those are the same in genus, which are under the same genus, as horse with man. Nevertheless, it may seem indeed that water from the same fountain, being called the same, has a certain difference besides the modes enumerated, yet such a thing must be placed at least in the same arrangement with those which are in some way or other said to be under one species, for all such things appear to be of a kindred nature and similar to each other, since all water is said to be the same in species with all water, because of the possession of a certain similarity, but water from the same fountain differs in nothing else except that the similarity is greater, wherefore we do not separate it from those which some way or other are said to be according to one species. Confessedly, however, that which is one in number seems especially to be called the same by all men. Still, we usually attribute this in many ways, most properly indeed and chiefly, when "same" is attributed in name or definition, as garment to a vestment, and animal pedestrian biped to man. Secondly, when it is attributed in property, as what is susceptible of science to man, and what naturally is carried upwards to fire. Thirdly, when from accident, as that which sits, or is musical, to Socrates, for all these would signify one thing in number, and that what we have now said is true, a person may especially learn from those who change appellations, for frequently, when we desire to call some one who is sitting by name, we change the appellation, when he to whom we give the order does not happen to understand, as if he would rather understand from accidents, and we desire him to call us, the person who is sitting or discoursing, evidently considering it the same thing to signify by name and by accident. Let therefore "same" be triply divided, as we have said. End of chapter 7 of book 1. Recording in memory of Mitchell Edwards.